right, Red Sox fans. We saw the Boston Red Sox season end actually a week ago today, and so I am going to do my annual kind of Red Sox requiem, if you will, but at least it won't be as shameful as the past 2 years where, at least with this season's Red Sox, I was able to turn on the TV and not feel ashamed for watching a game of baseball. So having said that, the 2016 Red Sox were a very weird team. I feel like in many ways they could have done better, and then in other areas I feel like they overachieved. But again, kind of getting to how they got to where they got to. I think the 2015 Red Sox, going back a year, were just really poorly constructed. Honestly, I mean they really had no direction. The pitching was awful from the beginning. I mean, you had Rick Porcello as your ace, and at that point, nobody really knew what Rick Porcello could do outside of Detroit. You had no number one. You had no ace pitcher. They pretty much just threw crap at a wall and hoped it would work, and it didn't. They signed Hanley Ramirez to be this big slugger, which it looked like he was going to be, and then he kind of fell off a cliff. Pablo Sandoval they got for some reason. We're still not really sure why. And, on and on. Just a bunch of mediocre signings. Now, 2016, they made a couple of key improvements to the team. Obviously, signing David Price to be the ace of the team and signing Craig Kimbrell to be the ace of the bullpen, the guy at the back end. So right there, they were already a stronger team. And from an offensive point of view, they had showed some promise the previous year as Bogarts and Mookie Betts kind of showed that they could play at the major league level. Well, again, this is where I feel like the Red Sox kind of got lucky in a way. I don't want to say lucky, but they didn't really sign anyone, like a position player, for the during the offseason. But, what happened with the 2016 Red Sox is, you saw something you don't usually see, which is you had three big-time prospects delivering at the same time. Of course, you know how I felt about Bogarts over the years, but he still had a pretty decent season. I'll get to him in a moment. Mookie Betts, did a lot better than even I thought he would. And Jackie Bradley Jr. was probably the pleasant surprise out of the three, even having said that, because Jackie Bradley, the whole knock on him was that he couldn't hit at the major league level. He could hit maybe like here and there, but he was like a 200 hitter. This year, his average was still around 267. Nothing great, but again, he was a pleasant surprise, though, because he hit 26 home runs. He was, really great defensive center fielder, and, it'll be interesting to see what they do with those three going forward, because certainly they have something that they haven't had in a long time, which is homegrown players that are really on the rise, to the point where I'm not worried at all about them next year as far as production goes. But I always felt like there was something missing from this team, and that's where I'm kind of torn, because I do feel like they kind of wasted their season. I feel like there was some potential in there that they just never got to. But then at the same time, I just, from the beginning, I never thought this was like a World Series team, so I can't really go back now and say, well, they didn't win it all, because I never thought they would. I thought, best case scenario, they might get to the ALCS and make it interesting. They might lose in 6 or 7 games like the 2008 Red Sox, who I thought were a better team, but I don't know. I just didn't feel like this Red Sox team was that good. And I know that's weird to say. They won 93 games, but you look at the way they got there, and this might have been the most stressful 93-win season I've ever endured. Meaning, they won the games, but there were so many games that they, could have won easily, or games that they coughed up, games that were just decided with, one out in the ninth. I mean, they had a lot of comebacks. They really did. And comebacks are fun to watch. I can't say that for the past couple of years of Red Sox teams. When the Red Sox would fall behind by a run or two late in the game, you pretty much knew they were going to lose somehow. But this team could fall behind by 5 or 6 runs, and you didn't think it was over just yet. And that was a pretty cool thing, admittingly. But at the same time, I just felt like this team was missing something. Just not talent. I mean, I can't really say that none of them produced. Almost all of them produced. But I just felt like they didn't have that championship edge. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's because there weren't, a lot of the run producers were rookies, relatively speaking. You didn't have that veteran presence. I mean, you had David Ortiz and Dustin Pedroia. And Hanley Ramirez has been around for a while, but this was only his second year with the Red Sox. And I just I had a feeling this team could be really good. I also had a feeling they could be really bad. So I'm if you just told me they won 93 games at the beginning of the season, I would have taken that. And I would have said, that's a really good season. And it was a really good season. But, you kind of got to the end of the season in September. I'm talking about before they went on that big winning streak, and I already, I heard people saying, this could be a World Series team, based on the pace they're on and the runs they're scoring and their starting pitching, which their starting pitching ended up being really good, but not for the reasons you would have expected. Like, David Price, to me, sucked. I mean, I know a 3.99 ERA isn't, the worst thing in the world, especially after last year where it seemed like everyone had a 5 ERA. But a 3.99 ERA from David Price just feels like a 6 ERA from anyone else. I mean, David Price routinely had ERAs in the 2s, maybe the 3s, but, he pretty much had a 4 ERA, and that's after he started so crappily, and then he kind of picked himself up a bit. But I just never got that impression from Price that, he had it. And that's kind of the thing I had with the whole Red Sox team is, in 2013, I just felt like the Red Sox had it. It wasn't always pretty, it wasn't always, like, a star-studded lineup, but the Red Sox won games, and I don't think they even went on an 11-game winning streak, but, they won, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 6, 6 out of 8, they won games consistently. You didn't really worry about them going into a big tailspin, you didn't, worry about who was on the mound, and that's kind of what I want to get to. Price and Porcello became the 1-2 of this team, with Rick Porcello actually being the 1. Rick Porcello won 22 games and was really good. Even I have to say, he was a lot better than I thought he would be. But even with Rick Porcello, when he got on the mound, I didn't think, this game is over. If the Red Sox got a 1 or 2 run lead, I didn't think, oh yeah, Rick Porcello's going to shut this down. Because sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he'd get the win, giving up a few home runs, but the Red Sox would just score 8 runs for him. So he got a lot of wins. His ERA was in the low 3s, which is all very good. And again, on paper, Price and Porcello seems like a good 1-2 punch, but obviously didn't work out in the playoffs. And besides that, Price almost never showed up in a big game all season. If the Red Sox needed to win a game to, have a winning road trip, if the Red Sox needed to win a game to keep up with the Blue Jays, whatever it was, it seemed like Price would let them down more often than not. He'd throw 3 innings and give up 8 runs. And then in the middle of the season against the Atlanta Braves or the Oakland Athletics, he would throw an 8-inning shutout. But I don't know. And I can't fault the Red Sox for getting Price. I wanted them to get Price. I'm glad they got David Price, and we'll see what he does next year. But he just never, to me, he was never the David Price that the Red Sox would face. When the Red Sox faced David Price when he was with Tampa Bay, I always felt like that was going to be a tough game. No matter how bad or good Tampa Bay was, if David Price was on the mound, I felt like the Red Sox probably weren't going to win that game. And same with when he was with Toronto. But when he was with the Red Sox, he was very hittable, a lot of lineups got to him, not just the good ones. That's, all I'm really going to say about David Price. But the reason I mentioned Price and Porcello is because, that was essentially supposed to be the modern-day incarnation of Lackey and Lester, who are still pitching, so it's not like they retired. And I still get upset about the Red Sox letting those two go. And, it's not like I ever thought it was a good idea. And, the funny thing is, on paper, if you told me you could have David Price, John Lester, or John Lackey, most people are probably going to take David Price. But there was just something about John Lester and even John Lackey. They fought out games. At the end of the season, they'd have about a 3.5 ERA usually. I know this year Lester's been pitching out of his mind, but for the most part, Lester was like a 3.5 ERA guy with the Red Sox. And same with John Lackey. He had a really bad season, but then he had a really good season in 2013. So for the most part, I could put Lackey in that same category. They give you 7 innings, usually 2 or 3 runs. Even it's not just the numbers, it's how they get them. If you need a shutdown inning from one of those two, they usually get it. And Lackey in particular, he always wanted to stay on the mound. If it was a big game, if it was a regular game, he just wanted to stay on the mound. The 6th or 7th inning, even if he had a couple guys on, he never was oh boy, I'm screwed. He always wanted to stay in and finish the inning. And I really admired that about him. I really liked John Lackey. I understood why they didn't keep Lester. I didn't really agree with it, but I understood they weren't going to sign him, so they traded him. But I don't know why they traded John Lackey. I think they could have kept him on for another year or two, and maybe they would have had a better season with him at top of the rotation, but that's whatever. They moved on from both of them, and now it's, David Price, who, the name is certainly nice. The back of the baseball card is nice, but I just don't get the same confidence with Price going as I would with John Lester. And it's not that John Lester's a better pitcher, because I think David Price might actually be a better pitcher overall, but when it counts the most, and even when it doesn't, just kind of in general, I just always liked that all the Red Sox team had that. It was Josh Beckett, Kurt Schilling, then later John Lester, even Clay Buchholz was pretty decent for a couple of years. They always had somebody that you could count on more often than not to give you 7 innings and 2 runs, which I think is what you want more often than not. Because even if you're not a good hitting team, if the other team only scores 2 runs, you got a chance. But more often than not, the Red Sox starting pitching has given them no chance, and the only reason they had one this year is because their hitting was so good. But, that's how I feel about the starting rotation. Now, the bullpen, I really thought Craig Kimbrell was going to be great. I really did. From the beginning, I thought he was going to be better than Price because I thought he was going to save more games as far as be integral in, making sure the Red Sox didn't blow games like they did in the past. Instead, he was behind them blowing a lot of games. He was pretty lousy, to be quite honest. And part of that wasn't because he was throwing balls down the middle. It's because he was walking everybody. Craig Kimbrell would have innings where he gave up like 1 hit, but he walked 3 or 4 guys. And I don't know. You saw it in that game against the Yankees where the Red Sox clinched the division, but they lost that game, and there was no reason for them to lose that game. And that's part of why I never got on board with this team as a championship team, because more often than not, the games they should win, they wouldn't. And then they would win a few games they probably shouldn't have won, but they lost more of those games. And if the Red Sox had won more of those games, if the Red Sox had won against the Yankees up 3-0 in the 9th, if the Red Sox had won at Anaheim up 1-0, if the Red Sox had won in Seattle when they were leading 4-0, I could go on and on. There was a game in Detroit where they were up 3-1 in the 8th. I mean, there were so many games where they were up late and their bullpen imploded or somebody made an error or something. This team just found ways to lose those kind of games. And had they won a few more of those, the Red Sox probably had home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And, maybe they still lose the series, but I don't know. Any hope I had for this team advancing past the first round of the playoffs kind of went out the window with that Red Sox-Yankees game, because that to me was kind of like, you know what? They just don't want it. And I know it sounds kind of ridiculous to say that given how far they came this year, winning the 93 games and everything, but at that point they had won, 92 games? And, they clinched the division, yay. Then they blow the game, and it was just kind of this whole thing of, them celebrating like, yay, we lost the game, woo, and then the next day they didn't play anybody. Like, they played all backup players, and then they lost 2 of the last 3. It was just like, it just left a very bad taste in my mouth to the point where I was like, you know what? This team doesn't really care if they win. They won the division. They're happy. The rookies are happy. The other players are glad. David Ortiz is, celebrating his last games at Fenway, and that was it. And I'm not one of those people that thinks that David Ortiz's retirement ceremony was a distraction. I just think the team had checked out. I think once they won the division, they were like, yay, even though they lost that game, and they lost like 6 out of 7 from there. I mean, they really just tanked it down the line. And that to me is where the wasted potential comes in, because you had a team with 3 30-home run hitters, a 20-game winner, even with all his struggles, a decent closer in Kimbrell. And, usually teams like that do a little better, but again, this team just didn't have it, and I really wish they did, because it would have been a great way for David Ortiz to end his career. Even players like Pedroia or, I guess that's really all I can think of for long-time Red Sox, but even players like that, would have been nice to see them get a chance to, for glory, not just a really good season. But alas, a team that had a chance to be really good settles for a pretty good season. And the wild card team, the Toronto Blue Jays, are playing for the World Series now. They're playing to get into the World Series, so just goes to show you, the Blue Jays kind of fought and clawed their way to get in, and the Red Sox kind of just sat on their laurels and let themselves lose and let the Indians win enough games to get home field advantage. And it's disappointing, but like I said, when the Red Sox lost that game to the Yankees, that's when I was like, you know what, whatever. If they had really had this phenomenal season and lost, I would have been more disappointed. But, if they're going to give up against the Yankees in that series and then give up on winning, more games, then why am I going to be that invested in watching them win a playoff game, which they couldn't do, by the way. I had to wait 3 years for a Red Sox playoff game, and I saw 3 games, and they all sucked. So I always thought that this group, Xander Bogaerts, Mookie Betts, Bradley, I always thought that they kind of had to experience failure before they could experience success. So maybe this is it. I always thought maybe they would, lose in the second round and really want to get further next year, but maybe this is just the first step of that. Maybe it's like the Celtics, they lose in the first round and maybe they get better next year and we see what happens. But I don't know. And it's not that they're not talented. I mean, I could easily see these guys coming back and having really good seasons. It's just, I don't know. It's rare that you get a season like this where so many players have career years. They had like 7 All-Stars, and their record really didn't indicate that, even though it was a good record. Their win-loss record could have been a lot better, and they could have done a lot better in the playoffs. But, again, I'm not blaming any one person. It's just what happened this year. And as a Red Sox fan, it's still disappointing, even though they were vastly improved from last year. So, I'm interested in knowing what you think. Did the Red Sox waste their potential, or was it just kind of what it was meant to be? It was just an okay team that did better than expected. So, I look forward to reading your comments. This is Bobby Gaines, talking Red Sox baseball for the last time this year, and we will talk again next year in the post-David Ortiz era.